It's so great to see all of you here. You may be interested to know that this event is being live streamed to other schools in our district and beyond. So I'd like to say hello to our online schools that are joining us as well. Welcome to the Authors in the Schools program presented by the Whistler Writers Festival. I'm Rebecca Wood-Barrett and I'm the artistic director. And we are very grateful to be able to be here to live, learn, and share on the unceded traditional lands of the Squamish Nation and Lil'wat Nation. The program is made possible by the generous support of these sponsors here. Armchair Books, BC Arts Council, Whistler Blackcomb Foundation, Whistler Community Foundation, the Province of British Columbia, Libby McKeever, Rotary Whistler Millennium, Whistler Public Library, and the Rotary Club of Whistler. So you can see we have many local groups who are really interested in books and big ideas and making sure you guys are involved. I am very excited today that we can bring Ann Eriksson to Whistler. She is a biologist and the author of 5 adult novels and 3 nonfiction ecological literacy books for younger readers. Her most recent publication is Urgent Message from a Hot Planet, Navigating the Climate Crisis, and you have the books in your school. It's an Orca Issues title. She's an avid environmentalist and works for SeaChange Marine Conservation Society, restoring eelgrass ecosystems, and is a founding director of the Thetis Island Nature Conservancy, and lives surrounded by nature on Thetis Island with her husband, poet Gary Geddes. And I'm sure many of you will be able to relate to this talk today, as we too spend much of our lives outdoors surrounded by nature. And I know it's really important to you too. So without further ado, I'd like to hand us over to Ann. I will be back a little bit later to take your questions. So think about any questions that you might have about the subject we're talking about today, and also the writing process, what it's like to be a writer. How do you write? Where do you get started? So we'll welcome your questions shortly. Thanks, Ann. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. And really, this is wonderful. I have to admit, this is the biggest audience I've ever spoken to. So I am a bit nervous. I'd really like to thank the Whistler Writers Festival for organizing this Author in the Schools talk. It's just really a pleasure for me to be able to share my work with you young people. I also like to thank Orca Books, who's my publisher, for making this book possible, and for Belle Withrich, the illustrator, who's just created some beautiful images. And this book is very, even though it's a difficult subject, it's just really kind of bright and positive with lots of pictures and color. In fact, there's color on every page, which is very unusual in a book. I'm hoping that this will be a conversation between us, that I'm not just giving you a lecture. So, you know, please feel free to ask questions. Well, we will have a sort of a more formal question and answer period a little bit later, but if you do have a question while I'm speaking, you know, please put up your hand and we'll go from there. So this book is dedicated to nature. Without nature, we literally wouldn't exist, would we? We need it for fresh air, clean water, all the food that we eat, for our shelter, and also for our mental health. I know when I'm out in nature, I always feel better. And I was very amazed at the location of your school in the middle of forest, close by to the lake, with the mountains surrounding. So I'm sure all of you are also very connected to nature. We've also done a disservice to nature, and that's one of the reasons why we're in the crisis that we are now. We've cut down trees and polluted water bodies, and really made the problem worse. It's like, there's an analogy of a bathtub, that we've filled the bathtub up to overflowing with greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And one of the problems is that because we've been so destructive of nature, that nature is actually what draws down the greenhouse gases into the oceans and the soils. So yes, nature is very important. So I want to just start by talking a bit about climate anxiety, also known as eco-anxiety, which I know many people are feeling, including many of you young people. I certainly feel it, and the people I know feel it. We hear about the problems in the news every day, and we're certainly feeling it in the weather that's happening. Like, how unusual is this kind of weather in October in Whistler? You're probably normally getting ready for the ski season. So I talked to a lot of people while I was writing this book. I interviewed climate scientists and environmentalists and young people, a lot of youth activists. I interviewed teachers and counselors and sort of everyday people. And I asked them two questions. The first question was, how do you keep going? You're working so hard and sometimes it doesn't feel like anything's happening. And the second question was, how do you look after yourself? And the answer to the first question was pretty consistent with everybody I talked to. What they told me is to get together with like-minded people and take some action. And that helps you feel more positive. I know I feel it. I belong to a nature conservancy on the small island where I live called the Thetis Island Nature Conservancy, and I'm wearing the conservancy t-shirt that says, "Think about nature." And when I'm out protecting land and restoring ecosystems and removing native or invasive plants and educating people about nature, I just feel so much more positive. So that was the message I got from everybody, and I hope that's a message that you can take. Do you have any kind of climate action group at the school here? Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, really great. Maybe you can tell me a little bit later on about the kinds of things the action that you're taking. The second question is, how do you look after yourself? I got all kinds of different answers. Things like meditating, doing yoga, knitting, volunteering for other organizations that do kind of, good social work, swimming. There were just, all kinds of stuff, and spending time in nature was another really big one that just about everybody mentioned. So I want you to think about those things in your own lives, like how you can look after yourself so that you can keep going. I'm going to talk just a little bit about how I got started and why I wrote this book. And then I'm going to read a little bit, and then we'll do the questions and answers. So there were a couple reasons why I wrote this book. One is that I'm a biologist, and I've been working a lot with government agencies and nonprofit organizations, writing about environmental issues, taking scientific information and turning it into publications that are understandable by the public. And just about through my whole career, there was always a climate component. And when I started writing, most of my work in the beginning was writing adult novels. I started in about 2000. And I tried to combine my biology and my writing passions together. So I always had some kind of environmental issue or social issue in my books. When I started writing nonfiction for young people, the first book I wrote was about the ocean conservation, and the second one about bird conservation. And climate change was always a component in those books. And as the years went by, the message just became stronger and stronger. And you may have noticed that too, just in the last few years, that the information about the climate crisis was becoming much more prominent. So there's a well-known Canadian scientist who actually works in the United States in Texas. Her name is Catherine Hayhoe. She has a great website called Global Weirding, and I highly recommend checking that out. She's got really great videos, and it's a lot about understanding the science of climate. And she says the most important thing we can do for the climate crisis to talk about it with each other. So I'm here to talk to you about it, but I also used my writing, my skills and talents to put this book together. And that's another recommendation, is that we really need the crisis is so huge that we really need everybody to use their skills and talents to make a difference. So perhaps you can think about a way that, you can use the talents that you have already and the skills that you want to develop over time to make a difference. The third reason was because I got angry. There was this notion that was going around that young people needed to fix the problem. And lots of young people, and I'm going to read about that, are doing that. But it felt to me as if, I had messed up my child's bedroom and was expecting them to go clean it up. It didn't feel fair. And it really did make me angry. And I met lots of young people in the writing of this book that were angry. They don't want to have anything to do with adults. So I wanted to write this book also to let you know that you're not alone, that there are many people from all walks of life, of all ages, who are working diligently for decades now to try and turn this problem around. So I'm going to read about some of those youth. This chapter is, I don't know, has anybody in here read the book yet? Not yet. I know your school has something like 30 copies, I think, in the library. So this chapter, it's one of 6 chapters. The book is kind of is a fairly broad overview. There's a book about the climate science, a book about the a chapter, about the consequences. Also the underlying problems that have created the climate crisis. And this one is called Change Makers and Climate Heroes. And it's really a tribute to all those people who've been working for so many decades and are working now to try and turn things around. And this is a quote at the beginning of the chapter. Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. And that's a quote by the former president of the United States, Barack Obama. Yay, Obama. Yes, we want him back. Your generation is leading the fight against the climate crisis. Perhaps you are among the millions of youth activists who have been striking from school and marching with Fridays for Future, demanding climate action from those who created the problems, world leaders, older generations, and the fossil fuel industry. Perhaps you're suing your government for not protecting you and future generations. Perhaps you're using your personal talents and interests to add your voice in a creative way. As tomorrow's leaders, you have gained the moral authority to make demands. It might not feel like it sometimes, but you are being heard. Your generation is in the news, at the global climate meetings, and in court. Even the climate skeptics are paying attention to you, although not always in the politest of language. I write this chapter as a celebration of your efforts. I know from talking to many youth climate activists that you are also angry, tired, and frightened. It's frustrating to work so hard for change and feel like nothing is happening. I write this chapter to let you know you are not alone. Many people from many walks of life and from many organizations have been working tirelessly for decades and continue to work to bring about positive change. Your generation stands on their shoulders. They continue to lift you up. You are carrying on their legacy. I know many of them are working alongside you. I don't have enough space in one short book to mention all the change makers and climate heroes. Because this book has an international focus, I've mostly, with a few exceptions, included those who have a global presence. But I applaud all the national and local groups and individuals who are making a difference in their regions where the most effective work can happen. In my mind, everyone who is contributing to the conversation is a climate hero. Youth from around the world have mobilized to do what many adults have failed to do: protect the intergenerational rights of children like you to a healthy, peaceful future. Youth of color, Indigenous youth, LGBTQ+ youth, and other young people from all socioeconomic situations have been working to make change, some for decades. In 1992, 12-year-old Severn Collis Suzuki, representing the Environmental Children's Organization, gave a powerful speech at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. She appealed to world leaders to stop the destruction of the environment, saying, "If you don't know how to fix it, please stop breaking it." Her words still resonate today. She didn't stop there, though. In 2000, she cycled across Canada with 5 friends to raise awareness about the climate crisis and air pollution. She also started the Skyfish Project, a youth think tank, which ran until 2004. Now married with 2 children, Severn continues to write and speak out as an environment and culture activist. Earth Guardian started in 1992 as a school in Maui, Hawaii, where students were taught about environmental awareness and action. The students worked in their local community to restore sandalwood forests and stop the toxic burning of sugarcane. Their efforts gained attention, even from the religious leader Dalai Lama. In 1999, wanting to reach more people, the school moved to Colorado and continued its work of teaching youth about political action and activism. Today, the organization has more than 300 Earth Guardian crews in 60 countries. The youth crews use art, music, storytelling, on-the-ground projects, civic engagement, and legal action to work towards solving environmental, climate, and social justice problems. You can find out if there's a crew in your area by visiting the Earth Guardian website. I'm sure I don't need to tell you about Greta Thunberg, the young Swedish climate activist who started going on strike from school in 2018 to show politicians how worried she is about the climate crisis. She protested outside the Swedish parliament every Friday with a sign that read, "School strike for climate." People started joining her, and she gained a lot of media attention. Her action inspired other young, her action inspired other young people to strike for school on Fridays, and the Fridays for Future movement was born. The momentum started by Greta and other youth-led organizations like Earth Guardians and Zero Hour culminated in the biggest international protest march in history in March 2019. 2 million people joined in over 2,000 marches in 137 countries. In 1 week in November of that year, over 7 million people, including my husband and me, walked out of work and school to demand climate action. Were any of you in the room here at that protest? Yeah, great, wonderful. Great. Listen to the climate science and start taking action now. You can read Greta's inspiring speeches in her book, No One is Too Small to Make a Difference. So one of the things I did when I was writing this book was to invite young people to submit personal stories and artwork and poetry, and I selected about a dozen of those. And just to illustrate how no one is really too small to make a difference, I'm going to read you one of those submissions. This is from a young Indian climate activist named Reddima Pandey. And these are her words. It's called A Climate Story. My country, India, is facing many problems like sea level rise, melting glaciers, drought, and floods. In 2013, a very devastating flash flood occurred in my home state, Uttarakhand. It washed away many houses, agricultural land, and villages. Many animals and people died, and many kids lost their parents, home, and everything. I asked my father, who was working for a non-governmental organization on wildlife protection, if I can do something to stop all of this. And just to let you know, Reddima was 9 years old at this time. He had a discussion with his lawyer friend, and in 2017, we filed a petition to the Indian Green Tribunal against the government of India for not taking our environment seriously. After 1.5 years, our petition was dismissed. Now we have taken that petition to the Supreme Court of India. In September 2019, I, along with 15 other children, including Greta Thunberg, filed a complaint against 5 countries, Argentina, Brazil, Turkey, France, and Germany, under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, for not protecting us, our child rights, from climate change. There is an inspirational doha by a great Indian poet and saint, Kabir Das. Finish tomorrow's task today, and today's tasks right now. And these are her last words in the piece: to save our planet, we have to start to act now. So I'd like to invite Rebecca up here, and I'll answer some questions about the climate crisis. Perhaps you can tell me about some of the actions that you're taking, and I'm also happy to answer questions about writing and the writing life.
Thanks, Ann. Let's give Ann a warm round of applause. I think
Thank you.
a great question to start us off is maybe you could let us know how many of you are thinking about climate change. Show of hands, do you think about it at all, or daily or weekly? And I'm curious, what are some of your thoughts, if anyone wants to share? Are you worried, or are you taking action? Has anyone noticed the weather today? Do you have any thoughts about, does it
There's a
seem?
question right here?
Yeah. I'm gonna let you ask that.
Is it selfish for my main concern to be about like the ski season? That's the only reason I really think about it, because I notice it in person. I see the results of it. It's not something out in the future, it's tangible.
Can you describe what the results are that you've seen?
My winter is really late. It's October and it's sunny. It's annoying. I
Mhm.
want to ski.
One of the there's the law, several laws of ecology that were coined by a biologist, an ecologist named Barry Commoner. And the very first one is that everything is connected to everything else. So your ski season and the weather, definitely you find a connection there, right? It affects your life. So if you tug on anything in nature, it will affect many other things. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about your ski season.
Ask Ann if she's familiar with our local group called Protect Our Winters.
No, I'm not. Please tell
So-
me about it.
Well, I don't know a lot, but there probably is a student in here that knows more about it than me. But Protect Our Winters, of course, is for Whistler because we are so interested in skiing and the weather and the snow, and we want a lot of snow. So we want to protect our winters. That's why Whistler's here. We're a ski town, right? So it's a huge thing. And the more that they have support, the more we can be involved in this whole climate change. That's what it's about. And of course, it's led by pro skiers, all kinds of people in the industry. And it's super important. And that's a local thing that we can get involved in because we want to ski. So we have to protect our environment. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great example of a really niche and local group that are working hard for all of us here. If we like to have snow in the winter, if we want to be able to ski, that's an immediate impact. Do
Yes,
we have
I
any other questions?
I think most of the most effective actions are those that you take at home in your communities, because that's where we all live. Even the CEOs of the fossil fuel industry live in a community. They have families. They have children, grandchildren. So they are also interested in their own health and safety.
That brings up another question that I'd like to ask you, Ann. So obviously, like the pandemic, climate change is affecting every single person on the planet. And some people, the climate crisis is going to be immediate and much worse. It'll destroy their homes. For us here living in BC, given the context of where we are, where we live, what would you say are some of the actions that we can take in our daily lives that will make a difference?
Yeah, there's the book is full of solutions and actions that you can take both to try and turn the climate crisis around, but also to prepare for the future, because we know that things are going to get more difficult. And there have been people in BC who have lost their homes in floods and fires. We know that. We've heard about people in Merritt, for example, and Lillooet and communities like that that had devastating wildfires and floods. So first thing I say is know you're not alone. Join with a group of people to take action, and it sounds like lots of you are already doing that. The other one is to aim for 2 tons of greenhouse gases a year per person. And that gives you sort of agency in your life, so you can know what kinds of things you can control. So there's lots of carbon calculators on the market, on the web. I use one called Climate Heroes, and you can just Google it, Climate Heroes carbon calculator, and make sure you put the carbon calculator part in, because there's other Climate Hero websites. So the last time I did my calculation, I was at 4.3 tons of carbon dioxide. The average North American is at 16 or 17 tons a year. So that's quite a difference that has to be, made up. And the great thing about Climate Heroes, that carbon calculator, is it asks you lots of questions like, what kind of food you eat and how you travel, what your purchases are like, whether you fly or not. And then it gives you a number, but it also goes through and tells you how you can cut that down. So for me, one of my issues is that, so I've decided not to fly except to go see my mother, who lives in Edmonton. She's 89 years old. I know she's not going to be around forever. So I drive to see her. I have an electric car. I drive to see her in the summertime and the spring when there's no snow in the mountains, but my car can't actually make it in the cold weather to Edmonton from the coast. So I do fly once a year, and that flight alone gives me almost a ton of carbon. So those kinds of things. Certainly the self-care, look after yourselves and each other. And really, one other important thing is to really listen to and support Indigenous peoples in their struggles against the climate crisis. And I know you have a really wonderful opportunity here in Whistler to engage with your local First Nations, who have a really fantastic cultural center I went to. And I'm assuming there's Indigenous youth here in the school as well. So they've learned over thousands of years how to live with nature, how to be part of nature, and also how to carry on from disasters as well. So really important to connect with Indigenous peoples.
Thank you. I'm curious, are any of you consciously making decisions to reduce your creation of carbon? Yes, and I'm going to bring the mic to you.
I mean, it's not specifically me, but my mom picked up an electric car yesterday, so that's.
Oh, great for her.
Should we not use cows for food or?
Yeah, so cows are, interestingly, produce methane. So they fart and they belch. They also use a lot of land. So certainly it is a recommendation to cut meat out of, especially beef, out of your diet as a form of climate action. And I haven't eaten beef, for decades, because I knew of the biological problems with eating cows. But when I wrote my book for birds, I ran it by a bird expert, and in it I had the idea of cutting out beef, and he said you have to be careful because there are ways of raising beef that are actually really good for the land, and that's not having large cattle lots. It's grazing and moving small numbers of cattle around and what it does is it helps. So they fertilize the land, and they also churn up the soil and create a situation where carbon is actually sequestered into the soil, and it actually makes the prairies more healthy. And this was, they learned this from knowing about history and the way that the buffalo were integrated into the natural prairie landscape. So, you know, it's good to really understand ecology and how it works in order to make the proper decisions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions on this side? Something I read in the book that I didn't realize was how bad the methane is in the environment. I think we've all heard about carbon dioxide, but could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, methane is a greenhouse gas also made up of carbon. It's carbon and hydrogen mixed together. And it's actually, so you know about natural gas. So natural gas is methane. And it is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon. So its heating potential is anywhere from 20 to 80 times the carbon dioxide. So it's released both through oil and gas extraction. It's also released through the melting of permafrost, which is the frozen land in the north. So it's a big worry. The one positive thing about methane is it doesn't last so long in the atmosphere. So it's something that by decreasing the amount of it, we can actually make really rapid changes. So there's a move now to focus on some of those shorter lived greenhouse gases in order to make kind of, you know, quick impacts.
I wonder if we could talk a little bit about the writing process. Are there any writers here in the group, or people who enjoy writing? Yeah, we have one there at the back. Great. Over here too. Excellent. What is your writing process like, Anne? And I would ask that you, since we are here today, that you do be respectful and quiet. We have about another 15, 20 minutes. And so listening well, please, for our guests. Thank you. And could you tell us what's your writing process? Well, maybe first of all, how did you come to the idea of this book, and why did you decide to write it this way?
Yeah, I think I did talk about that at the beginning. It is the third of an ecological literacy books that I've been working on since about 2016. So as I mentioned, I started out writing fiction, which is kind of my creative passion. I love writing fiction, but the creative process in writing nonfiction is quite different. Both for all my books, I've done a lot of research because they do have a lot of science in them. So I usually start out by writing a draft, first of all, actually doing lots of research, then writing a draft, and then going back and adding fixing, kind of putting more information into the holes that are in the book. I always give my work to experts to read so that I know I've got all the information correct. And lots of revising. I don't know, those of you who are writing already, revision is kind of a big job for writers, but it's also super important just to get the best book that you possibly can.
How did this idea come to you? I mean, it takes years and years to write a book, and then there's all the editing. So it takes a long time. It's a lot of work, and you have to have a passion to keep going. I'm sure some of you can relate to that. If you're really going to stick to something, it's much easier if you actually enjoy doing it and you feel strongly about it. So how did this book, like, what was the seed or the passion that really launched you into the journey?
Yeah, it was certainly that realization that things were really getting, very serious, and I wanted to do something to make a difference. And as a writer and a biologist, this seemed to be a logical way to do it. I was nervous about it because it's a really big topic, and I'm not a climate scientist. So I, wasn't sure whether I really wanted to do it or could do it. And my husband said to me, "What else would you be writing about right now?" And I thought about that, and I said, he's correct. I really, really want to take this move and spend the time. Took me about 3 years to work on to get this book ready for publication, and then another couple of years of editing. So it is a long process. And I have to say, things were changing so rapidly in the conversation about the climate crisis that I had to keep editing. I had to keep updating the book, even to the very last minute. I was talking to my publisher and saying, "Oh, the new Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report has just come out. There's new information. I need to put it in the book." I had to update the book for the COVID crisis, to acknowledge that it also had an impact on our lives, but it also showed us that governments could mobilize money and resources very quickly, and that we could all work together for a common cause.
We've all experienced the effects of the pandemic, and I've heard that it is really a consequence of the climate crisis. Can you explain a little bit about how those two are connected? Because I think everyone here can relate to the last few years of really having your lives impacted in a very serious way.
Yeah, there's two general ways that the climate crisis and COVID are connected. One is that we have destroyed a lot of natural areas, and I don't know if you know what zoonotic means, but zoonotic diseases are those that are transferred from animals to people. And because we have destroyed a lot of the biodiversity, so the forests and the grasslands, nature has come closer to humans because we've just destroyed their habitat, so they have to move somewhere else. So the chances of the transfer of zoonotic diseases to people becomes more likely. The other one is that we've become a global community and we travel a lot. So the chances of spreading a zoonotic disease amongst ourselves is also much more likely because we're just more of a global community and we interact personally and in a physical way more often. So you probably remember all the restrictions on travel that were put in, and that's why.
Yeah, you've got some good questions today. Thank you.
You said like you had this tracker for your emissions and stuff. Did you count into the fact the shipping or things for your book and the production of your book to the emissions?
Personally, I didn't, but that's definitely a factor. Everything we do has a consequence. Absolutely everything. And so I talk about the 3 E's to consider whenever you're making a decision. Emissions is one. So what kind of carbon emissions are the choices that you're making in your life creating? Ecology, how are the choices you're making affecting the environment? And the third one is equality. And that's how your choices, how are they impacting other people? So we know about sweatshops, for example, like if you're going to buy a piece of clothing, how does that impact, all 3 of those things? And can you make a different choice that will, and it's not a competition. We just try and do the best we can. So yes, this book has a carbon impact, no question about that. Is it important enough to get out there, even though it might cause some harm? The book is printed on, sustainable paper, that sort of thing, recycled paper, all of those things. The fact that I don't fly to go talk about it, I think is, something that was a hard decision to make. In fact, my husband is very angry at me for not wanting to fly to talk about my book. Luckily, we have things like Zoom that makes it possible to talk to people all over the place. And I have to say, I forgot to say hello to all the people that have Zoomed in from other schools.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things that did happen during the pandemic is that we discovered that we could do hard things really quickly. And we also started to think about all of the people around us too and how they were being affected. And just wearing a mask for all those months at a time, we were suddenly not just thinking about protecting ourselves, but thinking about protecting others. And I think we also realized that a huge part of our society is willing to, really make big changes if we can to help others. So that to me is really hopeful. I'm sure many of you were affected by the bus strike recently that lasted for many months, and we had to make changes. Did anybody end up getting an e-bike to get around? That was quite a big difference in our small town. I hope that keeps happening. We have about 7 minutes left, so I would like to reach out again. Are there any questions, things you're thinking about the climate crisis? I have a writing question. I'm a writer as well, and I'm just curious, Anne, what's your process like? How many hours a day do you write? Do you write all the time? Are you a binge writer? Are you steady? What's your process?
I call it the whenever form of writing. When I started writing in 2000, I was a single parent with 2 kids. I had a big garden and a house and a job. And I started waking up in the mornings with sentences and characters and paragraphs running through my head. And I said, go away. I don't have time for this. And I'd always wanted to be a writer, but I just felt like I couldn't do it at that time. But the story wouldn't let me go. It just kept plaguing me, every morning. And just by chance, a friend phoned me and she said, I'm starting a writers group. Would you like to join us? And she didn't know anything about this story that was haunting me. And I said, yes, please. And that writers group was the real impetus for my very first novel. And I really appreciated that writers group. And I recommend that to anybody who's starting writing, is find those people who you trust and that share your passion for writing, and just really share your writing and support one another. So I just kept writing after that. My book got published. It was so much fun. It was really the best experience I'd ever had in my life, was writing that book and getting it published. So I just kept going and working on new work, and was still a single parent with 2 children and a dog to walk and all of those things. And so I never procrastinated. When I had time, I sat down and I just wrote words. And words are what makes up a book. And they may not have been the best words, but they were words that contributed to the creation of that book. Now that my children are gone and I still work, but I do have much more time, and I actually find I procrastinate a bit more. But sometimes that procrastination is a part of the process. I might be out for a walk or having a bath or something, and suddenly a new idea for my book pops into my head. And so it's that giving yourself that quiet time to let your brain, even though you might not be thinking about it consciously. When I'm really engaged with a project, I just write all the time. And sometimes hours go by and I think it's been like 5 minutes, and that's really wonderful. I know, Rebecca, you probably had that experience too, where you're really what we talk about as being in that zone, the writing zone. It's a lot of fun. It's really a great feeling.
Thank you. I just want to add, for any of our online folks, if you do have a question, you can pop it in the Q&A and I'll get that question. What advice would you give to any of their young storytellers here who might be thinking about writing, or how do you get into it?
Yeah, I don't know. Is there, I'm sure you do some writing in your classes with your great teachers. But also, if there's a writers group sort of, outside of your classes that you can join together with, that's, I think, one of my biggest recommendations. But also just write what you're interested in. There are lots of, I did a workshop yesterday for middle schoolers on creative writing and writing fiction, and gave out a list of resources of places where you can get your work published and also connect in with young people who are writing from around the world. I can't think of the websites off the top of my head, but you can just, Google writing resources for youth. So I think there's lots of places where you can get your work published, and certainly have there are online writing communities as well.
That's great advice. So I've heard someone say once, write about what you know, but I actually think that's terrible advice.
I agree.
Because then you're always like, you feel handcuffed by, oh, I have to know everything about something before I start writing about it. And so I really like the idea that Anna's just said, write about what you're interested in. Because if you write about what you're interested in, you're going to learn about it, and you're going to be passionate about it. It'll be something that you care about. So that's great advice. So that is my advice to you. You don't have to know everything. It's okay. In fact, it's probably better if you don't know something, because that'll make you more interested. And if you don't know something, maybe someone else doesn't know it either.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, I always give my work, even my fiction, to kind of experts to read, but also friends and acquaintances and people I know that are interested in reading fiction, and they always give me great feedback. I know some people are kind of afraid of getting feedback, but I always very specifically tell the readers what information I want them to look at and how they want, what response I actually want. In terms of, is my character working, or does this plot make sense? And I just really actually crave that kind of positive feedback. So if you can find people that will give you that, it's really helps.
Okay, I do have one question coming in online. We only have a few more minutes left. Here's the question. I have a lot of semi-personal writing projects going at once. Any tips on how to finish some or all of them?
Well, there's just sit down and do the work. There's no getting around that. You have to spend a lot of time doing the work. There's a saying, how do you know when a writer is finished? They're, writing their novel or their short story or their poem. And the joke is that somebody feels sorry for you and takes it away, because you can always make your work better. And there's a point where you just have to stop and let the world be the judge, I guess, and work with an editor. Yeah. Thank you for that. So you guys get to be the judge of the book, and I do urge that you read it. And if there is a question, you can always write to authors. They love getting your feedback and your notes. So feel free to send an email and let Ann know what you thought, and if you have any questions. Thank you for coming today. We've really enjoyed being here. We've enjoyed our online audience as well. Thank you for coming. And let's give Ann a warm round of applause.